My name is Thomas Riley, and I am a ghost. Not in the spectral sense, but in the way that matters most. My life's most significant event is a story I can never tell, a truth I must carry to my grave. For 15 years, I piloted helicopters for the Forest Service over the vast green wilderness of the Cascade Mountains. I charted timber health, tracked wildlife, and mapped the scars left by fire and storm. I've logged over 8,000 hours in the air, a witness to the raw, untamed beauty of Washington and Oregon, a life spent looking down on a world few ever see. I thought I knew these forests, their secrets, their rhythms. Then, 3 years ago, on a cold dawn on March 23rd, an aerial survey destroyed everything I thought I knew about what lives in the deep woods. The assignment was routine, almost mundane. A research team from Oregon State University, their budget slashed, needed current thermal data on old-growth density in a remote section of the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. The area hadn't been properly surveyed since the mid-90s, and a private conservation fund was footing the bill. I took the job for the generous pay, and for the reason I took most jobs like it. The profound, soul-quieting privilege of flying over wilderness where no roads go, where the only sounds are the wind and the beat of my rotor blades. I lifted off from a small airstrip near Randall, just as the sun's first rays shattered against the eastern ridgeline. The valleys below were filled with a thick morning fog. A sea of white milk poured between the dark, sharp peaks of the mountains. It was perfect. The temperature and moisture contrast would make any thermal anomalies on the ground pop with brilliant clarity on my display, and the calm air guaranteed stable, usable footage. For a pilot, it was a poet's morning. The first 2 hours passed in a comfortable, familiar rhythm. I flew my pre-planned grid patterns over the target zone, the cameras humming, my attention divided between the instruments and the breathtaking landscape below. The forest was ancient, a dense tapestry of Douglas firs and western red cedars that had been seedlings when European ships first touched these shores. It's a kind of beauty that humbles you, that makes you feel small in the best, most clarifying way possible. Then, my world tilted on its axis. As I was passing over a deep, shadowed ravine, my thermal display flared to life with something utterly wrong. The screen, usually a cool blue-green map of the forest floor with occasional warm spots for wildlife, was now blotched with clusters of intense heat. There were too many signatures, they were too large, and most unnervingly, they were too organized. I've flown over massive elk herds migrating in the high country, over congregations of black bears at salmon runs, over mountain goats clinging to impossible cliffs. I know the thermal signature of every large animal in these mountains. This was not an animal. The pattern suggested structures arranged with undeniable purpose, buildings, and the individual heat signatures moving between them were immense, bipedal, and far larger than any bear. My training, my experience, my very sense of reality screamed that this was impossible, but the data was right there, glowing on my screen. I broke from my survey pattern, my heart hammering against my ribs, and banked the helicopter, descending for a closer look. The sun was gaining strength, burning off the fog in wisps and patches, offering tantalizing, terrifying glimpses of the ravine floor. What I saw made my hands tighten on the collective stick until my knuckles were bone white. Structures. Not caves, not random deadfall, but deliberate constructions. They were built from massive, interwoven branches, packed with earth and moss, some blending so perfectly with the forest floor they were nearly invisible. They were arranged in a rough circle around a large central clearing. I counted at least 30 distinct buildings before my mind stopped counting, utterly consumed by the figures moving among them. They walked upright, with a long, fluid stride. They were covered in thick, dark hair that ranged from black to a deep reddish brown, and they were enormous, easily 7, perhaps 8 feet tall, with a breadth of shoulder that spoke of incredible power. My first coherent thought was a desperate grasp for the mundane, a movie set. One of those Bigfoot documentaries, filming a dramatic reenactment. But the logic fell apart instantly. There were no vehicles, no generators, no camera crews, no lights. The nearest road was a brutal 20-mile trek away, over terrain that would deter all but the most fanatically determined hikers. This was no film set. This was real. I circled twice, maintaining an altitude of 800 feet, high enough that the sound of my rotors would be muffled by the terrain and my wash wouldn't disturb the treetops. The thermal camera, my silent, objective witness, captured everything. It recorded individuals entering and exiting the structures. It saw groups of them working together, lifting and placing huge logs for what looked like a new construction. It captured smaller figures, juveniles they had to be, playing in the central clearing under the watchful eyes of several adults. The social organization was complex, undeniable, and utterly alien. Then one of them looked up. I was a small speck in the vast sky, partially obscured by the last tendrils of morning fog, and it looked directly at me. Not a glance at the sky, not a reaction to the noise. Its head tilted and tracked my helicopter with focused, intelligent precision as I completed my circle. Then it raised a massive arm in a gesture to the others nearby. They all stopped what they were doing. In unison, they turned their attention upward. To me. Every pilot has a sixth sense, an instinct for when a situation is about to go wrong. You feel the subtle shift in air pressure before turbulence hits. You hear the change in the engine's whine that precedes a warning light. What I felt in that moment was a different kind of instinct, a primal, ancient terror that resonated deep in my DNA. It was the feeling of prey, the absolute certainty that you have been seen by a predator you cannot possibly comprehend. I shoved the collective forward, banking sharply, and got out of there as fast as the machine would carry me. The 40-minute flight back to the airstrip was the longest of my life. I kept glancing at my mirrors, half expecting to see some impossible shape following me through the clouds. My hands shook so badly that I nearly botched the landing, coming in too hot and having to abort for a go-around before finally setting the helicopter down with a jarring thump. I sat in the cockpit for a long time after shutting down the engine, the silence of the cabin deafening. The memory cards in my camera system contained footage that would detonate like a bomb in the world of science, culture, and religion. It was definitive proof of what thousands of people had claimed to see for generations, vindication for every person ever mocked for believing in Bigfoot. I also knew, with a certainty that went deeper than logic, that releasing that footage would be their death sentence. The next 3 weeks were a waking nightmare. I couldn't sleep, my mind replaying the footage, the sight of that community, the unnerving intelligence in that upward gaze. I copied the data to multiple encrypted hard drives, then made copies of the copies, terrified of losing the only evidence of what I'd seen. I spent hundreds of hours analyzing every frame, cataloging details, counting individuals, trying to comprehend the sheer depth of my discovery. The sophistication I saw was staggering. The structures weren't primitive lean-tos, they were carefully engineered, with what looked like designated openings for ventilation and drainage. The pathways between them were worn deep into the earth, suggesting generations of use. The clearings showed evidence of cultivation, not farming as we know it, but a deliberate arrangement of native plants that couldn't possibly be accidental. These weren't just animals hiding in the woods, this was a civilization. I was drowning in the secret, but who could I trust? The academic world would demand peer review and verification, which meant exposure. The media would turn it into a grotesque circus, a global spectacle that would descend on that ravine with helicopters and camera crews. Government agencies would either dismiss me as a crank or, far worse, classify the discovery and take action that could lead to their capture or extermination. My search for a confidant led me to Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, a primatologist at the University of Washington. She was a brilliant but controversial figure, having published papers arguing that the fossil record had significant gaps that could easily accommodate an undiscovered hominid species. Her colleagues considered her an eccentric, which to me meant she might actually listen. When I finally met her in her cluttered, book-lined office and showed her the footage, she went completely, utterly still. She watched the entire 47 minutes without a word, her expression unreadable. Then she immediately played it again. On the third viewing, she paused frequently, scribbling notes in a dense, looping script I couldn't decipher. When it was over, she removed her glasses and looked at me, her eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't name. It was a mixture of profound wonder and profound fear. "Mr. Riley," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "do you have any idea what you are showing me?" I told her I thought I did. "No," she said, shaking her head slowly. "You don't. This is evidence of a parallel evolution of intelligence on our own planet. It is proof that sapience is not a uniquely human trait. It is documentation of a species that has successfully hidden from our entire global civilization for what might be thousands of years." Then her expression hardened. "And if this footage ever becomes public, those beings will be gone within a generation." Her reasoning was grim, historical, and irrefutable. Every single time an advanced technological society has made contact with an indigenous one, the result has been disaster for the latter: disease, displacement, cultural collapse, assimilation, or annihilation. Even with the best intentions, especially with the best intentions, the dominant culture consumes everything in its path. These beings had survived by being a myth. Visibility would mean extinction. I asked her what we should do. She said she needed to think and asked for a week. That week stretched into a month as she carefully, painstakingly brought in a handful of trusted colleagues, one by one. Dr. James Whitehorse, an anthropologist specializing in first contact scenarios and indigenous rights. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a wildlife biologist with unparalleled experience in large mammal behavior. Dr. Raymond Kawamoto, a conservation geneticist who understood the labyrinthine legal frameworks that might or might not offer some protection. Each of them followed the same emotional arc: initial disbelief, followed by jaw-dropping wonder, then a slow, dawning horror as the implications of the discovery settled in. Our small, secret council stabilized at 5 members. We developed what we called the protocol, a set of sacred rules for protecting what we now refer to as the community. Rule 1 was absolute. No one else could know. Rule 2, any future observation must be conducted from a distance that made detection virtually impossible. Rule 3, the most important, we would defer to their wishes if we ever found a way to understand what those wishes were. Planning our return took months. We needed cover stories, specialized non-invasive equipment, and contingency plans for every imaginable disaster. Dr. Whitehorse was adamant that we were underestimating them. A species that had survived this long undetected, he argued, was almost certainly aware of our surveillance technology and had developed countermeasures. Approaching them again would be more dangerous than we could possibly anticipate. We returned in late summer, approaching the site from a completely different direction to avoid establishing a predictable pattern. The forest was lush and green, but the settlement was unchanged, if anything appearing slightly larger. We established an observation post on a ridge 3 miles away, a punishing hike from any access point. We used extreme telephoto lenses and directional microphones, gathering data without ever getting close enough to leave a scent on the wind. What we documented over the next week was a revelation. Their social structure was complex and, from what we could see, egalitarian and peaceful. We observed a clear division of labor, but it seemed based on individual aptitude rather than any detectable hierarchy. Adults engaged in a variety of tasks: gathering food, maintaining structures, and, most significantly, teaching the young. We witnessed older individuals demonstrating techniques for weaving branches or identifying edible plants to smaller groups of juveniles. This was conscious knowledge transfer, the bedrock of culture. Dr. Vasquez was mesmerized by their movement. They navigated the dense forest with an effortless efficiency that spoke of a profound generational intimacy with their territory. They used routes that maximized concealment and minimized effort, moving with a silence that defied their massive size. Their communication was a puzzle. We recorded low-frequency vocalizations, rumbles and calls, often at the edge of human hearing. But we also observed a sophisticated gestural language, subtle movements of hands, head, and posture that clearly conveyed complex information. Dr. Whitehorse theorized it was a silent language, developed specifically to avoid detection by sound-oriented predators like us. On the fifth day, we learned we weren't nearly as clever as we thought. It was Dr. Okonkwo who saw it first. A dark shape standing motionless in the tree line just behind our position. It had likely been there for hours, watching us watch its home. It was a female, we guessed from her build. Perhaps 7 feet tall. Her dark coat marked with distinctive silver patterns on her forearms. No one moved, no one breathed. The forest itself seemed to fall silent, every bird and insect holding its breath. She studied us, her expression unreadable. There was no threat, but no welcome either. Just calm, intelligent assessment. After what felt like an eternity, she let out a low, almost inaudible vocalization. From the settlement 3 miles below, an answering call echoed faintly back. Then she simply turned and walked back into the forest. She didn't run or flee. She walked with the serene confidence of someone in their own home, utterly unconcerned about pursuit. Despite her size, she vanished into the undergrowth in seconds, making no more noise than a falling leaf. We packed up immediately, our hands shaking. The message was unmistakable. We see you. We know you are here. Leave. It was a warning, a greeting, a boundary drawn. On the long hike back to our vehicles, we could feel their presence all around us, not close, not threatening, but there. An invisible escort, ensuring we left their territory. That night, crammed into a cheap motel room that smelled of mildew, we had the conversation that would define the rest of our lives. Dr. Kawamoto laid out the options: go public and try to control the narrative, continue secret observation and hope no one else finds them, attempt direct contact, or destroy all the evidence and walk away. Each option was fraught with terrible risk. It was Dr. Whitehorse who reframed the entire problem. "What if they don't need our protection?" he asked. "Our impulse to protect them is the same paternalism that has destroyed countless cultures. They've been protecting themselves for centuries. Maybe our job isn't to be their saviors, but to simply not be another threat they have to manage." That insight changed everything. We decided to observe not them, but the buffer zone around their territory. How did they interact with the encroaching human world? The patterns that emerged were subtle, but chillingly effective. A logging operation planning to survey the region suddenly abandoned its plans after a series of statistically impossible equipment failures. A proposed hiking trail was quietly rerouted after the planning committee received an anonymous, brilliantly argued technical brief outlining geological instabilities. A scientific team that got too close found their camp raided, their food supplies spoiled, and their GPS equipment mysteriously malfunctioning. They weren't just hiding. They were actively and intelligently managing human activity in their domain. This forced us to reconsider our role. We weren't their protectors. We were just another variable they had to manage. The question became, could we make ourselves a useful variable? The answer came in the early spring. We returned to our observation ridge to find a bundle of objects left for us. Carved wooden figures of animals, a collection of stones sorted by color, a length of woven fiber of exquisite craftsmanship. It was a gift, an acknowledgement, perhaps an invitation into a strange, new kind of relationship. We debated for hours on how to respond. We settled on practical, high-quality items that wouldn't create dependency. A durable steel knife, a bolt of weatherproof fabric, a collection of heirloom seeds for edible plants. We left our offering and withdrew. 3 days later, the items were gone. In their place stood a single perfect pine cone, balanced upright. This became our language, a silent monthly exchange of goods and symbols. We learned to interpret some of their tokens, developing a rough vocabulary. Dr. Okonkwo believed they were managing us, calibrating the contact to satisfy our curiosity without revealing anything that would endanger them. It should have been humbling, but it was liberating. The burden of being their sole protectors lifted. Our role wasn't to save them, but to assist them, to become a benign force in their world, to help them manage the threats they couldn't handle alone. Then the lumber company returned, backed by political influence and determined to log a tract of forest that served as a critical corridor for the community. Our usual methods of quiet interference failed. We faced the nightmare scenario: reveal the secret to stop the logging, or stay silent and watch their world be destroyed. The decision was taken from our hands. 3 weeks before logging was to begin, the company's entire staging area, trucks, skidders, generators, was systematically and silently destroyed in a single night. Security cameras showed only static. Guards heard nothing. The damage was precise, disabling complex engine systems and hydraulics in a way that suggested an intimate knowledge of mechanics. The company brought in new equipment. It suffered the same fate within 48 hours. After the third wave of destruction, the company pulled out, citing unforeseen complications. The next time we visited the exchange site, we found a token waiting for us, a small wooden carving of a logging machine, broken into pieces. They were telling us what they had done. They were not passive. They were not helpless. The years that followed settled into a routine. We continued our observations, our exchanges, and our quiet work of diverting threats. Through it all, the secret held. Dr. Whitehorse came to believe they had spent generations mastering the art of being unbelievable. Their rare appearances were calibrated to create myth, not proof. The blurry photos, the ambiguous footprints, these weren't failures of human investigation, but successes of their concealment. They had weaponized our skepticism. Our own certainty that they couldn't exist was their greatest shield. 15 years after my discovery, I made a decision. I was old, my body beginning to fail me. I returned to the ridge alone without equipment for the last time. I sat on a fallen log as dusk fell, and I spoke aloud to the silent forest. I thanked them for the purpose they had given my life. I told them I was afraid for their future, for a world that was shrinking, for a secret that grew heavier with each passing year. As I rose to leave, my joints aching, I saw it on the ground, a small carved figure of a human, bent with age. Next to it lay a single eagle feather, a symbol of honor, of respect, of connection. I picked them up, my eyes blurring with tears. They had heard, they understood. In their silent, profound way, they had said goodbye. The footage from that day remains locked away. The secret passed to a new, younger generation of guardians. The beings I discovered are still out there, our silent neighbors, our living shadows. They are proof that another way is possible, that intelligence doesn't have to lead to destruction. They are the road not taken, a constant humbling reminder of what we might have been. The forest keeps its secrets, and so, for the rest of my days, will I.